the sort of pros and cons between the main sort of AAA games and the less so, more AA standard games, and sort of why we prefer some over the other, and why some can be sort of detrimental to gaming as a whole. So I guess I'll let you sort of start us off here, talking about I guess the cons to AAA games, because I think that's sort of the part of this video that might be the most disagreed with in the comments.
Yeah, I mean, we want to get the negative out of the way, and then we can focus on the positive stuff anyway. So this is not necessarily a complete knock on AAA games. We will talk about a lot of benefits and a lot of things we do love about them that a little bit later. But there are also a lot of negatives to what has happened in gaming, probably over the last maybe generation and a half in terms of consoles. So this generation and the previous generation. One of the biggest things for me is that we've seen like a lot of game studios either being like absorbed into bigger ones, or like going out of business, or getting captured by the likes of EA and kind of controlled in terms of for profits and profit's sake rather than for creativity. And obviously as games fans, what we love is we love to see passion projects, creative games. They might not necessarily have to be AAA and have these amazing graphics that we will again talk about later, as long as we see the life and the value and the gaming experience of them. And so with less studios comes less games as well. So I find that generally there's a lot less choice out there at the moment for games, both genre-wise, but also within the genres. So, I mean, we briefly touched upon this recently in a couple of videos, but how many RPGs have come out in the last 5 years? Really?
I mean, even just limit that down. How many good RPGs that are like, not just like, that aren't just like brushed under the rug as well? Because I think that sort of comes as another side to it as well. Is just that a lot of the potential passion projects, especially in the RPG sphere, sort of just either vanish or just never come to light because of all the sort of AAA ones that take the limelight, even if they're not as good. So I mean, a good one that sort of comes to my mind is that the last one that I remember that was sort of under the radar but still really, really good was Kingdoms of Amalur. I know you didn't play that as much as I did back in the day, but when that came out, that wasn't like, even back then, it was sort of overshadowed by some of the bigger titles that were coming out at a similar time. So, your Skyrims and other launches in that time. So it's definitely, you can see the impact because nothing of that same sort of level has come out recently. That's, I mean, I guess the most recent one was, Elex, I would say, is probably the most recent under the radar RPG that hasn't been fully, well, I mean, it has been kind of buried by AAA titles, but not buried enough that we didn't see it, at least.
Yeah, so I mean, with all of these buried ones, is that sometimes it takes a bit of digging and a bit of being a fan to find them. Which it's like music, really. If you're a fan of a particular genre of music, you're going to delve deep. After a while of, let's say you're into grunge back in the early '90s, and you're into grunge because you listen to Nirvana and like Soundgarden and Pearl Jam, and you start getting into it so much that you think, right, I like listening to these people, I listen to them all the time, but what else is there? So you start to look further into it, and you start to find bands that, the average Joe off the street that is generally a bit more of an eclectic mix and likes what genre is on the radio, aren't going to know. So you, as a fan of grunge, are going to be more engorged, if you like, in the grunge genre. And as a games fan, it's the same. So obviously, back when I was a kid, when the internet was around, but it wasn't huge, there was still, your monthly PlayStation magazine, and then the unofficial PlayStation magazine, for example, that you'd get that would give you some news and some tidbits. But really, you'd find games sometimes by just going into your shop, your local shop, the games shop, and kind of flicking through the stacks that they have in there, and you'll find one, you're like, oh, what's that? And you'll see the cover, and then you read the blurb. So with Elex, I was going through the PlayStation store, about a year and a half ago, and I kind of found this one, and I'm like, well, what's that? It was really what it was. It was like, oh, what's that? I'm interested in that, and read the little write-up, and I thought, well, that's quite a good concept, actually. I kind of like that. And I didn't get it straight away because it was like full price, and I thought, no, I'm not going to just pay full price of like $90 or whatever on a whim. So I'm going to wait. If it comes out on sale, I'll give it a shot. And when it did, I did. and I still really like the world that they've got, but it's obviously not AAA, and I mean that in both graphics, movement, voice acting. Like, it's not AAA at all, but there is a certain charm about it, I've got to say. And what you'll find with AAA, which is obviously a really good thing for most people, is this polished, high level graphics. Great like frames per second. Like, the gameplay and the controls are top quality. The cutscenes are like unreal. The voice acting, generally, they've hired even actors that you'll have heard of these days more and more in games. It's becoming another way of actors to get good work. And I'm thinking of like The Witcher 3, for example, Charles Dance playing the Emperor, just as an example. Um, so you'll get all of this. So this high level storytelling, but often some of them just feel a little bit bereft of character still. And we've said this about quite a few games down the years, but you've got your No Man's Sky, for example, AAA game by any stretch, right? Build as this place where you could go anywhere in the universe and find anywhere in the universe. It's unlimited, and yet within 2 weeks, everyone put it down. And why is that? No character. I guess on that note, I mean, we did a recent video on Assassin's Creed and where it started and where it went wrong. And I think that you could see over the years, each release, like, it was becoming a bit more by the numbers. And I think you also have a bit more to say specifically on Ubisoft as well, don't you?
Yeah, so I think Ubisoft in general, and I guess the No Man's Sky example is pretty good as well. But I'll speak on Ubisoft first. Is a really good example of where AAA goes wrong. So sort of looking at the Assassin's Creed franchise over the years and how it started off as definitely they had an idea for this series, and a story following Desmond and his sort of ancestors. But as it sort of progressed, they realized they were running out of ideas, but they still wanted to keep this, I guess, confirmed income from this franchise going. So instead of giving it a break and coming back with new ideas and a fresh take on their series, which they've tried to do recently, and sort of failed, is that they kept pumping out the games one after another, spin-off after spin-off. Even some of the main series games were basically as good as what you'd expect from a spin-off, just because they wanted to slap the Assassin's Creed title on their game and call it a day and get money for that. And I think it's definitely it starts to become pretty obvious when obviously it's no longer sort of a project of passion and creativity and art. It's more just an expression of Ubisoft's lust for money, I guess. And it happens with a lot of companies now. As you said with No Man's Sky, I think the original team, Hello Games, definitely had their vision. But I guess as soon as Sony sort of snapped them up and turned it into their own little AAA studio and started funding them and trying to pump on to the advertising and all this sort of thing, it sort of forces it into becoming more of a project for profit rather than a project of what Hello Games actually wanted, which is a concept that they wanted to see as a game rather than what it became. I think No Man's Sky is a really good example actually as well, because recently, having sort of died down from the original controversy and the original hype and all that sort of thing, they've started to release post-launch updates, which are actually pretty good. I can't say I've gone out of my way to play it myself. I'm still pretty skeptical, but I think now that there's a bit less pressure from Sony for a release date and that sort of thing, now that they're just able to work on it and enjoy their time doing it and listen to the fans and get content into the game that they actually want to put in the game, not for money, but just so that the game is better, it's actually starting to sort of shine through. And I think we need more of that, and way less of the sort of corporate AAA companies like Ubisoft and Sony and that sort. So yeah.
Yeah, so I think what I would say is one of the issues with AAA is a general issue in the gaming world overall, and it's this is grab for money, the money where it's available, and in many ways, it's the sort of ways that money's been available in the last probably 10 years more than ever has been like annual releases. And so you look at like some of the highest selling games series like FIFA, Madden, like whatever it is, NHL, that kind of stuff, because they're done yearly, because the seasons are yearly. It makes sense to release them yearly, even if it doesn't necessarily make sense to always buy them yearly, because sometimes the improvements are just not that big, right? It's still just the same game, but just with slightly different kits and the players on a different team, which you could probably do in game if you had a patch, right? But um, but people still did buy them generally on a yearly basis, and so then your Ubisoft probably looked at that and thought, we can start releasing something on a yearly basis, which they pretty much did for a few years, didn't they? Like between the first Assassin's Creed and the second Assassin's Creed was like 2 or 3 years gap actually, and
Yeah.
you could tell a bit of a difference. Like it was still the same engine, it was still the same core, but there was a difference between the two. And I've just been replaying them recently, so I can tell you like very recently what some of those differences are. And some of them were mechanics, some of them were slightly graphical. So the faces on Assassin's Creed 2, for example, were a bit more in depth than on Assassin's Creed 1. Um, and various things like that. There was actually differences, so it was worth it. But then between the what I would call the Assassin's Creed 3 and then Assassin's Creed, I think Syndicate years, it's pretty much the same. It's just a different makeup on the same face, right? More or less. There was a few minor alterations in terms of a couple of little things that you could do, but basically it felt the same. So I felt like it was a yearly thing for them. And you have Call of Duty as well, which is guilty of this. There's a lot of series like that kind of thought, I'm going to just release one, or we're going to release one every year and have that income every year. People might say, like, so for me, that's one of the issues. Another one of the issues is probably just generally what consoles have, how much money is actually there. So bearing in mind, population of the world is growing, right? Do you know, like, and this is a quiz for anyone listening, does anyone, like, can anyone tell me or guess without looking what the highest selling console of all time is?
I actually don't know. I would love to find out though.
Okay, so the highest selling console of all time is the PlayStation 2, released in the year 2000, and they've sold over 155 million units.
Well, I'm kind of glad actually the PS2 is the best. So.
Well, the PlayStation 2 also coincided with what I think was one of the best eras in terms of games and variety of games coming out. It was then rivaled in a small way by the original Xbox that came out. Now, the original Xbox sold 24 million units, which is nowhere near the same ballpark. So it was a lot more niche, but it was, I would say, they had a few PC gamers come across, and there was probably quite a few sold off the back of games like Halo, for example.
Yeah, definitely Halo would have sold it for a lot of people.
And it was nowhere near a perfect console, right? And most of those 24 million were probably within the US, which they were very strong in at the time. But then they released Xbox 360 in 2005. So they got a year's head start on the PlayStation 3. Also, by the way, sorry, there is another issue with this, right? Is first of all, the PlayStation 2, which hadn't been released yet, was also a precursor. So it had DVD capability, whereas before that, consoles only had CD. And I might be wrong on this, and I probably need to just look it up before saying it, but I'm going to say it anyway and then look it up and correct myself later if I need to. But the original Xbox, I don't believe, had DVD capability straight off the bat from itself. Like you had to do an update or a patch or whatever to do that. And I think that's one of the things that probably harmed it. But the Xbox then improved when it got to the 360. In 2005, it sold over 84 million. And then the PlayStation 3, which came out a year later, was 87 million. So basically, they sold like for like, more or less. Within 3 million units of each other worldwide is nothing, really. So they sold pretty well. So this is an era of good sales. The PlayStation 4, by the way, sold 108 million units, which puts it as the second highest selling console of all time. In terms of games units at all, DS and Game Boy Color, both are second and third on the list. So the DS has sold like 150 million, and the Game Boy and Game Boy Color between them have sold 118 million. So more than the PlayStation 4, but less than the PlayStation 2. And that's going to be natural, right? They're cheaper, they're more portable. They had Pokemon, etc., etc. But I guess the reason why I'm talking about this is it's no surprise that the era that I remember as a kid and having games of all kinds, lots of them, in fact, was the PlayStation 2 years. And the PlayStation 4 years, which, okay, had more sales than I was actually anticipating, I think that most of those sales were PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 3 when they sold those two were based off of Blu-ray. I think Blu-ray, and now PlayStation 4, you can get the Netflix apps and stuff like that through it. So home entertainment in general. So I think that there's probably a lot of people that have a PlayStation 4 in their home and like 3 games for it, and they don't really play the games. They use it as a way to watch things.
I can
would
pretty
say.
much confirm that is how it is in my house. So we have a few games on it, but not too many that we go back to after a first playthrough, and then the rest is just to watch things.
Right. So, and just to touch on this again as well. So, if you go down the list of consoles, I'm not talking about Game Boys or portable ones. I'm talking about mainstay on your TV consoles. So it's PlayStation 2, PlayStation 4, PlayStation, Wii, PlayStation 3, Xbox 360. That's the list of the top lot. As you can probably imagine, and you have to go quite a long way down to get to Sega Genesis and then 64 and Atari, GameCube, some of those other ones. But basically, Sony have a massive monopoly here. But what that's meant is that AAA games, by and large, in the last 20 years, if you think PlayStation 2 is really when it started to turn around. I mean, PlayStation did well, but really got huge for PlayStation 2. A lot of games developers have focused on console, probably over and above PC on a lot of cases. And I think a lot of passion projects probably still exist on PC, more so than on games console itself, because games console is probably more expensive and harder to format.
So I was going to get into that at the end, but I'll let you continue before I talk about PC, because I feel like that would be a nice point to end on.
Okay, well, we can touch it back onto it later. But just from what I was going to say is that it's the more we get into console and away from PC, has been a case of these AAA games kind of ticking boxes rather than, as I said, passion projects. And there's one developer, or not just one, but there's a couple of developers at the moment that I think are not getting stuck into that same, or maybe there's a handful. We'll name a couple, and Rockstar I think are a pretty obvious one. They don't release games every year, not even close to that.
I wish, bro. I wish they released them more often.
Agreed. Although I think if they did, you would see that
less
would start to fall into the same traps. Although I do think that 7 years since the last GTA is just way too much. Thanks very much, Rockstar. We want GTA 6, please. But anyway, I think this is why their games, when they do come out, are lauded as high as they are, and also the sheer units that they sell. I mean, I think they made over $1 billion on Red Dead Redemption 2, and it's because they don't release one every year. it, and I think that's something to remember. Is that you're not going to sell like with. So, for example, PlayStation 4, 108 million PlayStation 4s worldwide, and Xbox One is about 46 million currently worldwide. So that's not huge. That's not huge. You think that's 150 million people worldwide have one of those two consoles this current generation. 150 million households worldwide. Okay. So how many at most can you realistically sell of that copy of a game? 150 million, right? Pretty much on a console at the moment. So there's not as much money in it at the moment for console as it felt like there used to be. So that's one of the issues. But yeah, I mean, for me, I think it's a case of trying to get that yearly release is a big issue. And I also think another issue is sometimes you can polish a turd, but it's still a turd. And I think that even with these, like, for example, Red Dead Redemption 2, even that one, if you really look at it, is not the masterpiece. And we've talked about this in our review of it. It's not the masterpiece exactly that it's made up to be quite so much. And so I think that's another issue is that it looks great. And I'd say this too. The games, ever since the dawn of console gaming that had the best graphics, generally have been racing games like Gran Turismo and Forza, for example. And they're really good for racing games and they look amazing and everything else. But unless you're into racing games, how much game time are you going to get out of it? So
yeah.
There's something about you can have great graphics, but it doesn't mean that you've got a great game. We talked about this as a comparison back in the day between, say, Oblivion, which is a good game, let's be real, it is, but between Oblivion and, say, Fable: The Lost Chapters, which I played around the same time, and I would play Fable Lost Chapters over Oblivion every day because it felt much more lifelike and characterful, and it was done by a smaller studio. I don't think you could call it AAA at all. But it was, for me, it was a magnificent game that's just timeless because of it, basically. Whereas Oblivion, when you try and have the best graphics, there's always going to be someone that has better graphics in the next couple of years, right? There's that constant push to improve your graphics and your control system that sometimes doesn't make for the game itself to be as good.
Yeah, and I think, as you said, like they often lose sight, not just because they're in it for profit, but yeah, also because they're going for what they think the largest consumer base would want. They're pushing for the greatest possible graphics, or the tightest possible controls, or things like that. When really they should just be pushing for the most passionate, like true to heart game that they could make. And I guess to sort of push towards the end of the video here, I'll talk about real quick. I think the best place to get games that are passion projects and are sort of produced not necessarily entirely for profit, but mostly just because a team had the idea and wanted to see it fully sort of realized, is definitely on Steam. I know you're not so much of a PC gamer at the moment, but I definitely, anybody who is, absolutely, sometimes just looking through Steam, seeing maybe not the things that are on sale, although sometimes there are some pretty good sales on these types of games, but definitely just keeping an eye out on what's selling well on Steam, because more often than not, it's the types of games that you won't be seeing on console. Sometimes they're just only on PC, or sometimes they just don't sell on console, whereas on PC you might be able to sort of suss them out and realize that looks like a really good game, that maybe it's a lot smaller and has a lot less content than some of these AAA games, but it is what they wanted it to be. So you're purchasing a game that is complete and sort of I guess whole. As you said with Fable, it's like it's a much I guess smaller game. It's not AAA like Oblivion was, but or at least I wouldn't call it AAA. But it's complete. It's a passion project that ended with exactly what they wanted to, or maybe not exactly, but very close to what they wanted it to be like by the end. So I guess that's the main difference between AAA and sort of the non AAA games. And I still think PC is the best place for it right now, but I really hope that console starts to get more. Because I remember, would have been around 2012 and stuff, there was games like Limbo. I think you played Limbo actually as well. The Binding of Isaac. Yeah, I think you showed me Limbo. There's the Binding of Isaac. There's so many of these much smaller games that are way more enjoyable than some of the AAA titles that we see these days. So definitely, I hope that our audience already knows this, but definitely if you don't always expect AAA games to be better, because I think more often than not you'll be surprised in a good way by non AAA titles.
Yeah, and on that note, not to bring up something, but something that just came out, and we'll be talking about this in another video, I'm sure, is the remastering or remake. Really, it's not remastering; it's a remake of Final Fantasy VII. And whilst it does look pretty good, it's been AAA-ified. And it was AAA for the time, if that makes sense, back in 1997. But it's I would say that the remastering that came out of that a few years ago is probably, I think, this is just a prediction, is still going to be better than this remake of it. Just because, like, when you start to put that facade on something, it's like the new Star Wars trilogy, or the least recent one, is special effects are amazing, wardrobe is amazing, the everything else looks fantastic, but it was a big part of shit because it was done for one reason and one reason only, and that was money. So I think look, there's a time and place for good AAA games like The Witcher 3 and Red Dead Redemption 2 and God of War and these kinds of titles. Some of them are absolutely amazing. But if you're looking for something a bit deeper than that and something to really get stuck into, I agree with Steam, and I do have a Steam account. I just don't have a PC currently.
Yeah.
That's up to it. But there are still some of those titles that creep onto, like, so for example, the PlayStation Network or the Xbox Marketplace or whatever it is. So, for example, last year we had Observer as like a kind of cyberpunky kind of horror style non AAA game, which had Rutger Hauer as the main character, who's a pretty awesome actor. But it was kind of a nice little story. It was kind of interesting, not very long, not very expansive, but just good, right? Like good fun. So that's what I would say. Agree with you. Go onto Steam and still look out for those games and just do a bit of searching. And also, if you still have your PlayStation 2 around, or a PlayStation 3 that's got backwards compatibility, or Xbox 360 and Xbox, for example, we have a video coming out soon of a list of games from this kind of time that were great and maybe forgotten. So maybe go and check that one out when it comes up, and you can have some ideas for what else to play during this time when we're all locked down.
Yep, and with that, thank you very much for watching, and hopefully, don't take our advice too seriously, but definitely, consider it, because I do
No, screw
really,
that. Take our advice
yeah,
seriously.
take our advice to heart immediately, because yeah, I really do think that
And
AAA
remember,
games are
this
a
is the
little bit.
internet. So if you disagree with us, you're wrong, and you're obviously stupid, and you don't know anything. That's the attitude, right?
Exactly, and you're just a troll, so get out.
100%. All right. And on that note, we'll see you in the next video.
Bye.